Hello, and welcome back to another chapter. In this chapter, what we're talking about is object-oriented programming. In specific, what we're going to talk about in this series, we're going to show examples with PHP, but most of this information that we learn with object-oriented programming will translate to any programming language that has object-oriented programming capability. So, first and foremost, I separated this from the PHP because you don't have to program in an object-oriented way. In fact, it's kind of a trend lately to hate on object-oriented programming and to not use it. I believe that object-oriented programming has a ton of benefits, and I think the pros outweigh the cons personally, and I love object-oriented programming. But I wasn't always like that. You see, I actually had a job for several years before I understood object-oriented programming. I learned procedural PHP and I went and got a job and I just kind of faked it with object-oriented programming. Anything that came up, I was scared to death to tell anybody that I didn't understand it and I didn't understand what was going on. And I watched a bunch of tutorials and none of them really made sense for me. So the thing is it's really not that complicated. Let me just kind of give you a few things. In this video, we're just going to do a few introduction things. And I'm going to give you a couple concepts to think about. And then we're going to dive in and we're going to build some objects and we're going to program in that way. Now, this whole chapter is just going to be kind of an introduction to object-oriented programming. But in the next chapter, what we're going to do is we're going to start a new project. And instead of using procedural PHP like we did in our first project, we're going to build the next project entirely within the object-oriented programming framework. And so you're going to get really familiar with object-oriented programming by the time we're done building it. So I know there's a lot of fear involved with object-oriented programming a lot of times with new developers. It can be a little overwhelming to learn, and it can be a stumbling block for new developers. So what is an object? Now, I thought a lot about how to explain what an object is, and a lot of courses kind of go and they talk about a person being an object or these different things, and we'll do a little bit of that. But basically, in procedural I'm going to compare it with procedural programming because you've just built an entire project, a login registration with procedural code. Now, procedural code is just you write a line of code and then it executes that line. It goes down and executes the line. You can read it from top to bottom, and you can also read objects from top to bottom. But an object, what it allows us to do is if you have similar bits of code, what you can do is you could package them up and you could put the data with the object and the functions that the data might need to manipulate the data or display the data or add it to a database, whatever. You can add functionality and the properties of an object, and you can package it all up together, and you can take that whole object and use it in various parts of your application. And it's super powerful. And the other thing that it really allows us to do is it allows for code sharing a lot, because if I write classes or objects, we'll talk a lot in the next video about the difference between a class and an object, but just know that I can write some code. Like if I want to write a class that handles all of my database interaction, I can call this class DB. And what's really cool about it is now I have this class and I can actually use that package of code in any or all of my applications that I write moving forward. So it allows me to reuse code in a very sane way. And so it's a self-contained way of programming so that I can take that class and use it in multiple projects. And I think that's where object-oriented programming really, really shines. The other thing that is just for me, I actually get kind of stressed out now when I have to develop something not using object-oriented programming, because it really just makes a lot of sense. After you get used to it, the way of thinking, it's just like so slick. And the only way I can describe it is it just makes programming easier. Now there are a few cons to it, so I mapped out some kind of big pros. there are some cons, and the cons would be when we start talking about inheritance and things like that, it can become very confusing where certain properties are being set because you have this idea of like parent objects and child objects, and they extend one another, and you have functions in one place, and you may not know where they are. But if you understand object-oriented programming, it's not difficult. It just takes a little bit to get used to. And honestly, I think it's really the reason that people are shying away from it. They think it's more code. It is a lot more code to write sometimes in the very beginning to do the same thing. You're like, hey, I could just do that in procedural programming a lot easier and simpler. However, if you're going to be maintaining a large application, you're going to be fixing bugs, and you're going to be updating it for an ongoing period of time, object-oriented programming will really save you a ton of time, and it will make things more just easier to extend and test and everything else. And the thing of it is I just said I was going to give you a bunch of cons, and I went back to another pro or positive of it, and it's really because I love object-oriented programming. It's really hard for me to not want to use it, and so I'm excited to teach you object-oriented programming. I hope you don't have the same thing. I had like a stigma about me when I was learning, and I heard that object-oriented programming, and it just confused me, and I didn't know what to do. So let's just kind of set that aside, and if you do have that fear or something, let's just forget about that and just start fresh. Get all those ideas in your head out, and maybe you've read some blog posts about how object-oriented programming is bad. If you're in that boat and you decided not to learn it because you read another developer who was all high and mighty on their horse and saying that it's terrible and anybody who uses it don't know what they're doing, let me teach it to you. Let's build a project with it, and then I want you to decide for yourself if you like it. Now, there are pros and cons to object-oriented programming versus what most people would use as functional programming. There's also pros and cons to functional programming, okay? The reality is you should use whatever's best for the situation that you're in at the moment. It doesn't matter. You shouldn't be hardline saying, I'm only going to use object-oriented programming, or I'm only going to use functional programming. If the application is best suited in one or the other paradigms, you should choose the paradigm that fits the application the best and is going to best serve the client and the stakeholders of the application the best that you can. And so with that being said, I will say if you do write your own classes and put them somewhere and you start a lot of applications, you can really speed up your development process across multiple applications. So with that, I will see you guys in the next video, and we're going to talk about the difference between an object and a class. See you there.